Hey everybody, and welcome to Open Door Philosophy. I'm your host, the deficiency of virtue, Mr. Parsons.
And I'm Andrew, the clown of virtue.
The clown of virtue. Very good. All right, and welcome to episode 91, the second part of our three-part series on Plato's Symposium. Today we'll be covering the speeches of Aristophanes and Agathon, so get hyped.
Very exciting.
Yeah, it'll be good stuff. So anyway, before we get going, how's life in the East Coast, Andrew?
It's wonderful. The weather sounds like has been much better than Houston, although I've heard that Houston is kind of getting a cold front right now. The only complaint I have is that the allergies seem to be flaring up. So if you can hear it in my voice today, apologies. I do not sound this gravelly all the time, but I think the allergies are starting to get to me from fall. So other than that, everything's great. Super busy with school, but everybody's busy too. So yeah, how are you doing? I know you've reached an exciting threshold of the year.
I suppose it could be called that. Well, first of all, speaking of voices, really sorry about last episode, everyone. We have no idea why my audio sounded the way it did, but it did. So, we'll follow Epictetus's dictates and not stress about it because there's not anything we can do about it at this point. I'm doing great. You are correct. Beautiful weather has come to Houston. And in fact, even the humidity is somewhat low. So it feels really nice outside. Houston, once every couple of, let's see here, probably a couple times a year, will give you a perfect day of weather. And this is one of them, I think.
That's great.
So anyway, we'll do something outside just for the heck of it. Let's see. But everything else, I'm good. I guess the threshold you're referring to is, in my course, these students' requirements is they write a 2,000 word philosophical analysis paper over a topic of their choice. And I have those rough drafts right now. And I'm going through them. So, every now and then one of my students listens to this. So I don't want to say something like, and boy, are those rough drafts rough. But, I'd never say that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I do have an interesting update, by the way. I just finished another book this morning.
Okay.
It's called The Drawing of the Three. It's the second book in a 7-book series by Stephen King, The Dark Tower. I looked at yes, people, I do this. I looked at my spreadsheet of books that I've read recently. And I've read 7 fiction books in a row.
Wow. That's weird for you.
That's kind of rare. I mean, I love fiction, don't get me wrong, but I don't know what the deal is. It's just, I suppose it's easier than reading some primary tome of philosophy, but
yeah. Well, it's always good to take a break and relax a little bit.
It's true. Yeah. So I don't know what I'll do next. I started Natural Goodness by Philippa Foot, so
I'm geez.
Sure I'll
I hope it's a naturally good book.
Naturally good analytical, Yeah.
So I have a question for you before we get started.
Oh, okay.
And maybe I've asked you something around this level, but what's your favorite book you've ever read? Or I'll give you an opt-out. What's one book you think everyone should read? It doesn't have to be philosophy. It can be fun.
Yeah. Well, I think the answer to both those questions are different. I don't know, though. So much of memory is wrapped up in false memories. We paint things to be better than they were, perhaps. My when people ask me that question, my pat answer is Les Miserables. It has been years since I've read that, and it's also gigantic. And I may not find it as pleasurable as I did 25 years ago or so when I read it originally. But something everyone should read. I think Dante's Inferno is brilliant. I suppose you could throw the whole Divine Comedy in there, but that's a great one. So anyway, those are my 2 answers. How about you?
I don't I don't have an answer. I don't know. But I'm curious because I want to compile a great list. But if I had to, I would say probably and I hate to recommend it because it's kind of stock and sounds a little pretentious, but I really liked last year. I read Crime and Punishment for the first time, and I
Mm,
thought that that
mm-hmm.
book was very. It made me feel things that I've never felt before.
It's a brilliant book.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's the only book I think I've ever read that's made me feel something. So
Mm.
or feel something to that level. So I'd recommend that book. But if you're, if it's not your cup of tea, don't worry about it.
That makes me think of. I mean, you said made you feel things. It's a very short list of books that have made me cry,
Yeah.
and actually, I can only think of one. Although I know there have been others, but the book "And the Mountains Echoed" by Khalid Hosseini. I was reading that. Actually, I remember the part where I was crying. Perhaps I was just exhausted. But we were flying back from a trip to Italy, and I was on the plane, and it was this passage about this the son's love for his parents and especially his mother. And I was thinking of my mom, and I was on that plane, and it was dark, and I was crying. So anyway, it was beautiful, beautiful.
That's great. I love his other two books. I haven't read that one yet, but I love his other two books.
Yeah, yeah, they're great books. Everyone go check them out. Kite Runner and A Thousand Splendid Suns, I think
Yep.
is the middle
Yep.
book. Anyway, not middle book as in a trilogy, but
Yeah.
the second
Yeah.
book.
Yeah. That's right. And maybe he's published more. I don't know. I
Yeah, I don't
just
know.
those are the three big ones. Yeah.
Hmm.
Anyways,
Anyways,
speaking
we
of
digress.
speaking of things we love, let's talk about some Plato.
Let's talk about some Plato. I got to
So
tell you, I
yeah.
you know I did my annual presentation to the students, introducing them to Plato's theory of forms. We've talked about this before on the podcast. How much I love it, and when it's over, I think last year I said, I was high on Plato. I remember last year I texted my wife. I'm like, Plato's theory of forms is the most beautiful theory, and blah 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 blah. I was just gushing. So anyway, I got to do that last week, so that's always good fun.
That's fun. Yeah. I think it's very I think it's a very compelling theory, and I think that a lot of students probably would not like it or would not buy it, but it's a beautiful theory, and I think it is quite plausible. So
Yeah,
yeah. How
yeah.
was the reception of that?
Oh, it was good. This year for the first time, I decided to do a project about it
Oh,
after we went over it. And when we went over it, it was kind of like a three-parter. Like I started them with allegory of the cave, and then we talked about tripartite soul and reason, and then the third day was about theory of forms, and kind of wrapped those two previous days into the theory of forms, and it just keeps coming. I mean, it just keeps coming up through, throughout all the areas of philosophy we study. And I feel like students just really need to know it well. I mean, for the seniors right now, we're doing philosophy of religion. What's the first thing we're reading? Well, it's about Plato's conception of God. And, it all has to do with theory of forms. And,
yeah,
so I thought we'd do a project this year to really try to drive it home. Anyway,
that's
I'm not
great.
sure what your original comment was, but
I don't know if have we ever done an episode on Plato's theory of forms?
man, it would have been a long time ago.
Yeah,
It would have been
maybe
a
that's
long time
something we
ago.
should revisit. Let us know if you want us to do an episode about that.
We should probably do it no matter what people want.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
All
I'm
right.
sure it's
Well,
woven through a couple of episodes. I know we discussed it briefly all the way back on our second episode on
yes.
Allegory of the
Yes.
Cave,
Yes.
but we have certainly never given it, its own individual treatment.
Yeah, we've talked about it a lot. It's very important, and like everything that Plato writes, I guess.
I mean, all of philosophy is just a footnote to him.
That's right. That's right. Today we won't be talking super a lot about either Plato's theory of forms or Socrates, who delivers that from Plato, but we will talk about some of Plato's ideas. In the last episode, we discussed the basic setup of this great dialogue, the symposium, and we also talked about the literary aspects behind it. We talked about how Plato intentionally chose each of these speakers to present their theory of love with their in quotation marks because it could be theirs and might have been somewhat related to them. But of course, these are all uh, this never it probably never happened. It's just a conception that Plato wrote down like a fictional text. But all of these people certainly existed. They all lived about the same time. So maybe it's something that could have happened. But I think you put it well last in our last episode. This was maybe the original piece of fan fiction, where we get all of these great
That's right.
characters together to talk about these theories.
I think fan fiction is credited to you. I think you're the one who said that. I came up with the silly Avengers example, but
Right,
I think
right.
you said
That
fan
might have
fiction.
been a better example, I think, because it does demonstrate just to the extent of which these were big figures of the time. Last time we talked about three of the what would it be the six three of the
Six.
six people who talk in the dialogue. We talked about Phaedrus. We gave an account of his conception of love, where he talked about it as a god who inspired people, inspired, and he gave that great example of the soldier. We talked about Pausanias, who was a legal scholar of the time. We talked about some commonly love and heavenly love, and a little bit about the pederasty, which he discusses. And we also talked about Eryximachus, who of course is the physician who talked about the almost Taoist approach to love, how
Mm.
it's a centering force of the universe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in today's episode, we're going to continue with two and maybe three. We're going to talk about Aristophanes, Agathon, and we might talk about Alcibiades. And then in our final episode, we will talk about Socrates, who's probably the big money player here.
That's right. He is the he's the feature. He's the what is it called? The main event if we're at a
Yes, yes,
boxing event. Oh yeah, the top card or something like that. Anyway, boxing.
the prime event. Yeah,
The prime event. He's the headliner.
yes, that's right.
But anyway, everyone else is just the opening act. But the first speech that we're going to go over is quite the opening act. It is Aristophanes. So just a tad bit of background on Aristophanes in real life, if you will. He was a very well known playwright
Yes.
in Greece. Wrote a lot of comedies. I can't remember how many survive in their
I'm not
fullness.
sure off the top of my head. I know there's
Yeah,
three that I'm familiar with.
yeah. There's the clouds, the frogs.
There's another
Uh,
one that I'll talk about a little bit called
okay.
the Theos Morazanio.
Well, as far as context goes, Socrates is going to speak. Well, he's two more speeches after. I mean, he's the second speech after Aristophanes. But just for some fun background, Aristophanes, one of his best known plays is The Clouds, which was a spoof of Socrates. The whole play is just about what a funny character this Socrates guy is. And so here he is, in the Symposium, and he's at the same event here with Socrates. And I don't know in reality if they actually knew each other, but it's fun that he's here, and it's important that he's here. He gives a really beautiful, very poetic. Agathon's is very poetic as well, but a very poetic rendering of his account of love and where it comes from and why we love the way that we do. So I don't know. I guess shall we get into it?
Yes, let's do it. I think that was
Yeah.
very good.
So what's really interesting about Aristophanes, for me, from my perspective, I think of all the six speeches, his is probably next to Socrates, is probably the theory that resonates most with people these days. And that's what I'll just loosely call the soulmate theory. No one uses that term in the Symposium, but I'm going to call that. So it's the soulmate theory. It's that out there somewhere is your other half, and you search and search whatever your entire life looking for that person, and once you find them, you feel whole again. And whether that's through something like Disney movies or rom coms these days or whatever, books, this this idea of that out there somewhere is that one special person for you is, I don't know if it originates with Aristophanes, but certainly his account, that's what his account is. There's a whole mythology that goes behind it and why we're searching for that one special person. So So Aristophanes gives a speech where he tells the tale of how human beings, well, how beings were originally formed centuries and centuries ago, at the beginning of time, with the gods. Human beings were originally one being. There were three sexes, and so there was a man sex, woman sex, and androgynous. In Aristophanes' telling of this famous Greek myth, these two people were fused together. Their backs kind of fused to each other, so their faces were facing away of each other. And he kind of describes them as kind of like a ball. And this creature who is one but two in one has four arms and four legs, and it describes them kind of rolling around. And the sexes here were combined of what Aristophanes says, that the female sex was associated with the moon, the male sex was associated with the sun, and they're fused together and they kind of form this androgynous creature. Anyway, and I can't remember from the reading, although I just read it, I can't remember from the reading what the cause was here, but they decide to try to overthrow the gods. It isn't successful. And in order to punish them, Zeus didn't want to completely destroy them. But in order to punish them, their punishment was to be separated from each other. So Zeus essentially, cuts right down the middle and separates the man from the woman, or in some cases, the man from the man or the woman from the woman. And once they're separated, there's a lot of discussion, some technicality of like what happens. Like Apollo turns their heads, so they can face each other, and they're originally their genitals are facing the wrong direction, so eventually they swap them and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, we end up with a human being that we kind of know today with two arms and two legs. And now that we're separated from each other, we're constantly trying to find that other person. So, I mean, that's kind of it in a nutshell. He talks about three different types of love: heterosexual, homosexual, and lesbian. And we can say some more about that. But that's it in a nutshell. I have a couple quotes I want to read.
Let me add one bit of context. Remember that Aristophanes was a comic playwright, and so we should, I think, take this little bit of it's a ridiculous story.
It is a
What's going on
ridiculous
here?
story.
It does reflect the nature of love for sure, but I mean, this is supposed to be funny.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about how these people from the beginning of time, how they would get around by doing cartwheels everywhere because they'd
Mm-hmm.
have four hands and 4 feet, and they'd be cartwheeling around everywhere. And so it's supposed to be a bit absurd, I think, a little bit funny, and so we should read it in that way.
Yeah, so how he describes this as it also traveled, talking about the singular creature, it also traveled upright, just as now, in whatever direction it wished. And whenever they took off in a swift run, they brought their legs around straight and somersaulted as tumblers do. And then, with 8 limbs to support them, they rolled around in a swift circle.
It's supposed to be funny, and Aristophanes starts his speech off with this. Remember last time we noted that he was supposed to go before, but he had the hiccups, and so
That's right.
so that's why he didn't go. He's kind of joking around at the beginning of this, and he says, we do need to, and everybody's like, they keep referencing him that in his speech he's going to be making a lot of these jokes. So it should be funny. That's what he's expected to be, and he his point for doing this is he's saying, okay, before we praise Eros, the god of love, which is what they're doing in their speeches, we first need to understand the origin of love. We need to understand how it started, and so that's why he's giving this speech. But otherwise, I think you hit the big points.
Yeah, back to the humor part of it, because that's definitely something that's lost. In my translation, some translations do this. They kind of give headliners of each section, what's going on, and the headline in this translation says, "Second interlude: Aristophanes recovered from his hiccups." and and here's just a little speech. Remember, the person who tried to cure or offered a cure for his hiccups was Eriximachus, which is this kind of, he's a physician, but he's very
He's
know
proud,
it all.
haughty. Yeah.
Yeah, haughty, good. So Aristophanes says, yes, the hiccups did indeed stop, though not before I applied the sneeze. which
Yeah.
is one of his. Eric Zamakis tells him to tickle his nose with a feather. This will
Yes.
help with. He says, but not before I applied the sneeze. So I wonder if the more orderly element of the body doesn't desire the sorts of noises and tickles a sneeze is, because it stopped right away when I applied the sneeze to it. And so he's like teasing Eric Zamakis here.
Yes.
And Eric Zamakis says in reply, my dear Aristophanes, look what you're doing. You make jokes just when you're going to speak, and you compel me to become a guardian of your own speech, to see that you don't say something ridiculous when you could have spoken in a piece. So basically, you're right. Like Aristophanes is a comedic writer, and this account of these lovers smushed together in a kind of a ball doing cartwheels and everything is meant to be funny, and it reads that way when you think of it in that light and you read the actual text. Aristophanes tells this wonderful tale. It's funny. I imagine the people there are kind of snickering and laughing a bit. but then he kind of like he begins to pull it in, right? As I suppose maybe a good speaker does, right? You start out with a speech that kind of pulls people in, and you've got their attention, and whether that's because it's humorous or whether because it's dramatic or whatever. But so now he's going to make a serious point, after he's talked about this, and his whole point here is that Eros the god is highly involved in this. Once that humans are separated, even though he tells this kind of funny story, he's being quite serious about soulmates. People, he believed that there are people out there who other people just click with. And I'm sure that's a very familiar notion for lots of people who are listening. I mean, you may have that special romantic someone, but it also applies to things like friendships.
Yes.
A great question is, why are you friends with this one person? When I'm talking to my juniors, and of course, they're just they're teenagers, so interested in love, and I really lean into that. And I'm like, okay, there's 2,200 people at this school. Why this one person? Why is this one person the person that you find that you're so enamored with? It's a silly example, but it's a great question.
It's a
Love is
great
kind of
great
a
example.
mysterious thing. Go ahead, Andrew. Sorry.
No, 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 no. I think it's such a good example that you're giving.
Love is a mysterious thing, and so whether that's love between, and of course Greeks had so many words for love, whether it's love between friends or love between romantic partners. Anyway, Aristophanes tries to identify a cause for this, because the thing I talk about with students is we can identify things that we like about a person, and this will actually kind of go into Socrates' speech, but we won't go there just yet. But there are outward things that initially we like about a person, right? Like maybe they have the same sense of humor, or maybe they like the same music that we do, or same movies or something, or they're a fan of this particular sports team, and so are we. And that's kind of some outward or initial types of attraction to a person. And then of course in the case of romance, you're also attracted to how they look. But Aristophanes is like, okay, outside of that, there's something more. There's something else that drives the two of you together, and it is this aspect of eros. So I want to read, if you're following along, this is from 191d. It's a short quote, and then I'll read a slightly longer one. So 191d, he says, so eros for each other is inborn in people from as long ago as that. So he's saying eros is in each of us, and he unites their ancient nature, undertaking to make one from two and heal the human nature. And so when we're talking about finding that special someone, we're being healed. And there's an ancient nature. And when we say nature, it's like the fundamental aspect of what we are. So he says for human nature, one of the fundamental features that we are seeking this other person, right? And when we find them, the reason we seek is because it heals our human nature, because of the separation from each other in this initial story of two human beings being severed in two, is that it's painful, and they're always looking for each other throughout the remainder of their lives. And when they find them, if they're lucky enough to find that person, they are healed, which is a beautiful account.
Yes, it is.
And then one other quote that somewhat follows this. It's a little bit longer. This is from 192c. It says, when the lover of boys and every other lover meets in his own particular half, they are then marvelously struck by friendship and kinship and eros, and sacredly willing to be separated from each other even for a little time. These are the people who pass their whole lives with each other, but who can't even say what they wished for themselves by being with the other. No one can think it is for the sake of sexual intercourse that the one so eagerly delights in being with the other. Instead, the soul of each clearly wishes for something else. It can't be put into words. It divines what it wishes and obscurely hints at it. So that's where he's kind of talking about the mystery of love. You can't put words to it. And the next thing I wanted to talk about is, to what extent is his explanation of love perhaps an oversimplification of love rather than sort of addressing the complexities of love? I don't know. What do you think, Andrew?
It's a good point. It's a great point, and it really gets into the Agathon criticism. Agathon, the next speech has of all his preceding speeches, is that he's not answering the question. He's talking about the origins of love, not the natures of love. For one,
Yeah.
secondly, and this might let me see if I can wrap these two together. Aristophanes was like the most sexual playwright ever. I mean, even if you read his stuff now, it's extremely sexual. And I was reading something online that said the hiccups that he had might be an allusion to that. You know, if the bodily functions gone awry, that
Mm.
it's like a nod to that. I don't know if that's true, but yeah, he's talking a lot about the sexual appetite here, which is not a favorite of Plato. I mean,
Hmm.
Plato's very would be very disappointed with this. An oversimplification of love, maybe, but and I'll let you talk about that more. But let's not forget, it's so easy to do this, and I see this whenever this is talked about online. That people love this because it's talking about homosexual relationships. It's not a joke, but it's a comedy. And so
Hmm.
I think that it's a sliver of a comedy, and we shouldn't dismiss it because of that. But how much we should take this to, the table, I don't know. It's something to keep in mind. This could be an interlude, a funny interlude. That's what the people in the play thought. And there's all of this scholarship too. And I was going to talk about this when we talked about Socrates, but that Plato's kind of throwing Aristophanes under the bus here, and not in a mean way, but saying, okay,
Hmm.
well, look, you've portrayed Socrates as this this sexualized fool in your plays multiple times. Look at you first. Second, you're a fool who's getting. I mean, what he says is not foolish, but he's presented as a fool, and Socrates demolishes him in his
Hmm.
speech. So, anyway, that does not answer the question that you raised about is this oversimplifying love, but maybe some
Yes.
additional tangential context.
This is a good example of what people take from literature or any type of art, whether it's there or not. It's a type of interpretation, right? We can draw some type of meaning from a play or a painting that the author or artist never intended.
Yes.
Art kind of
Yes.
becomes the possession of the viewer once
Yes.
it is kind of out there in the world. And so while Aristophanes is joking around a bit, and Plato, as the author of this symposium or of this dialogue, is kind of setting him up to be slammed by Socrates. People who aren't aware of that, they'll read this and they'll think like, "Oh, this is a beautiful account of romance," and
Yeah.
and that doesn't diminish that particular interpretation, doesn't make it any less. It's important to that person and to that
Yes.
group of people. And obviously, this idea of soulmates is clearly a part of Western romance and has been for centuries. So when I say like maybe it's oversimplifies love or it doesn't really explore the complexities of love, I mean, I think that's right. I don't think it
Yeah.
does. It gives a sort of an origin account, but it certainly cements this idea in, I think, in the Western conception of soulmates out there. Here's another question for those who view this as a sort of soulmate argument. Aristophanes And we see this when he talks from that quote I read when he talks about Eros, that love is like this quest for wholeness. And so this has nothing to do with Symposium, but it certainly does with the soulmate theory. Is love something that, I mean, can love truly make an individual feel complete?
Yeah,
Or is this some type of idealized notion?
yeah, it's a great question, and it's really a, it's a personal question, and it's so difficult for us to answer because feelings are so hard to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Not because it's difficult to talk about feelings, but because it's difficult to put feelings into words. That's the whole point of poetry, I think, and literature.
Yeah.
Does love make you feel whole? Well, I think you're maybe you're more equipped to speak about this than I am. So I'll
Okay,
switch
well,
it back
sure.
to you. Yeah.
I'll have at it. Yeah, yeah, it's a great question. Depends on, kind of what we mean by wholeness, or complete. I often say things like, I just really don't know who I would be without my wife.
Yeah.
Our lives are so enmeshed at this point because of the years that we've spent together. We kind of become, in a way, sort of a collective mind. We say each other's sayings. We have inside jokes with each other. Of course, I have friends and I have family. But if for some reason she was just ripped from my life, boy, I mean, I think I would be quite unmoored for some time. So in that way, she certainly completes me, or I do feel more whole when she has to go on the road, or I have to go on the road. Man, I hate it. Like it's so weird being without her. And I think when we read Aristophanes' accounts, these are the types of things we're sort of thinking about
Yeah.
outside of the context of, or the historical context of the dialogue. Now, does that mean like, there's two puzzle pieces and I'm one and she's another, and like our pieces fit together perfectly? And is that the type of, soulmate wholeness thing? Just some, maybe even some sort of metaphysical explanation of all this. I don't know about that. I don't know that I believe in soulmates. I believe that people come together and they grow together over time. There's some initial, and maybe Socrates addresses this. There's some initial attraction, but then two people, as they grow together over time. This is the same for friendships as well.
Yeah.
They become immersed with each other, or enmeshed. I think is probably the better word. So I don't know. That's kind of my view on things. Well, looking at the clock, we should probably get on to Agathon.
Agathon's not, he's not as important in the speech as Aristophanes is, I think, because for two reasons. First off, Aristophanes has such, as you mentioned, a rich cultural heritage and following. I think now this is like a super popular myth to talk about. Another reason is Agathon is placed in the story and presented in a most genius way. His speech is beautiful. It's a beautiful speech. It's beautifully presented to us. He says a lot of beautiful things, but it really lacks substance,
Mm-hmm.
especially philosophical substance. It talks about things for sure. It especially highlights maybe the Greek idea of love at the time the best. But does it add anything to the table? I don't think so. And that's what I think is pretty much the prevailing view of his speech here.
Mm-hmm.
Let's give a little bit of a background before we dive into it too much. And let's start with the name. Agathon was a real person. He's documented. He's actually made fun of a lot by Aristophanes and some of Aristophanes' play. He's mentioned in other plays with, or he's mentioned in other dialogues with Socrates. Mentioned that he's seeing Pausanias, or however we want to see it. They're together. Agathon was a playwright. He was a tragic playwright. But out of all of us, and I mentioned that he was real because he's not some fictional character, but his name itself, Agathon, the word agathos means good, and so his name Agathon, Agathos, they're this for the purposes of this, they sound different. They're the same. It's just Greek endings will change it, but his name means the good, essentially, and a lot, from that time, it was very common for people to say, uh, "O kalos agathos," which, when referring to him in the Greek, which means the beautiful Agathon, or really what it means is the beautiful good. And Plato loves to string these words together in the Republic, where he says, "Kalos kai agathos," the good and the beautiful and the good. And of course, Plato, he'll whenever we talk about this forms business, that's the ultimate form. The kalos kai agathos, the good and the beautiful. But regardless, his name just means the good. He's mentioned as being very beautiful in many Greek dialogues, like I said, but as we'll see later, in a different and contrasting way from our friend Alcibiades, who's supposed to be the most beautiful of all time. Agathon is beautiful in an effeminate way, which is what he's made fun of for. And I think I mentioned this already. He was a playwright of that time, but not a comic playwright as his friend Aristophanes was, but a tragic playwright. And of course, this is what why this whole business is going on. The symposium is going on because Agathon just won his competition. He won
That's right.
the tragic playwright competition.
He's got the laurel wreath on his head.
Yes,
He's
exactly,
he's
exactly.
probably showing off.
He is, he is, and I think that that's enough background as I want to present now. But let me mention two tangential things which are not related but might add to your reading of the symposium. The first one is there's an extremely famous portrait of Plato's Symposium that I think it's quite good from Anselm Feuerbach from 1869, which is a great depiction of this. And secondly, the famous composer and conductor Leonard Bernstein, who wrote West Side Story, the music to West Side Story, and a lot of other very famous musician in the 20th century, wrote a piece called it's called Serenade After Plato's Symposium. So
Hmm.
he makes music depicting all of the different playwrights. And for Agathon, which Leonard Bernstein, of course, not a philosopher, but he found it the most beautiful. And so if you listen to
Yeah.
Agathon and Plato's Symposium, it's the most beautiful piece. It's very, very beautiful. That's all I have to say. But do you have anything to add about any of the background for Agathon?
Uh, I don't know how important it is. Wasn't he in a relationship with maybe Pausanias or
He
Paetus?
was. He
Yeah.
was, yes. He was. And I think they mentioned that somewhere earlier in the dialogue, but definitely historically, that seems to have been the case.
No, I don't think I have anything to add at this point. I do have something to say about the beautiful poetry of it whenever we get to it.
Sure. Let me just add one last thing. If you remember, they're sitting in an order, and Agathon is sitting next to Socrates. Agathon saved the spot next to him specifically for Socrates. There's some speculation that there's a fragment of of kind of love poetry between Plato and Agathon, but I don't think it's
Oh, really?
actually
Between
legit.
Plato or Socrates?
Yes,
Plato?
between Plato
Really?
and Agathon. Let me see if
I
I
did
can
not know
find
that.
it real quick. Um, Here it is. Yeah, so there's a short little poem called Lover's Lips, which they attribute to Plato. I don't think it actually is. But it says, "Kissing Agathon, I had my soul upon my lips, for it rose, poor wretch, as though to cross over." Anyways,
That's the fragment?
that's the fragment.
Yeah, that's all there is of it. Huh,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Do you want to
Yeah.
talk about the beauty?
Oh, I suppose. I mean, you'll probably pull quotes. I don't have his speech in front of me right now, but it is a beautiful, beautiful speech, and that's the best
Yeah.
way to describe it. It soars. I mean, it's poetry. It's it's just laced with exuberance, and so the connection I want to make between this poem and Aristophanes' poem. And I don't know if there's any significance to a tragedian following a comic playwright.
There is, I
That's kind
think.
of
Yeah.
interesting to note. In Aristophanes' discussion, the quote I read, the soul of each clearly wishes for something else, and it can't be put into words. Andrew, earlier you mentioned, it's like this is maybe what poetry is for. I feel like Agathon's I don't think he's necessarily directly responding to Aristophanes, but if you want an example from this particular dialogue of an explanation of what love is by attempting to put words to it, this is the speech. It soars. It's beautiful. Is there substance to it? I don't know, but it is beautiful.
It is. So let's get started with the philosophy aspect of it. The speech starts off with Agathon noting that, you know, everybody's been missing the point. They've been talking about what love does to people, or the origins of it, but not the nature of love or eros. In contrast to our first speech with Phaedrus, Agathon presents love as this very youthful, eternally youthful creature who's floating around. He's the youngest of the gods, and he mentions that the gods' very nature and action changed from when love began to exist and when it didn't. He mentions about all of these horrible past decisions that the gods made, and they did so not because they loved humanity, but because it was necessary for their own survival, for humanity and the gods. But when love enters the equation, gods become more peaceful. They're not as upset as much. And so he's talking about the nature of love there. He moves on. He talks about how love can exist within people. I think he mentions how love, the God, will only enter into someone who has two characteristics. The first is that they're young, and the second is that they're, what's the word here? I want to say velvety, but it's not. It's soft sounds weird too, but it's essentially soft. Their characters are not hard and constrained, but they have a softer personality. So
Mm,
those are the two things. And whenever they leave, whenever one leaves, love flees from an individual, which
mm,
is kind of funny. And I think all of this so far hasn't been especially helpful in determining the philosophy of this, but it's all leading to Agathon's discussion of the virtues of love. He mentions the four cardinal virtues: temperance, justice, courage, and wisdom. But he mentions there's a fifth virtue, and that of being love. Love itself is virtue. He mentions that love is the greatest of virtues, and this reminded me today of I don't I believe that it's a biblical quote, but I think it's Paul saying uh, faith, hope, and charity, the three virtues, the three Christian virtues: faith, hope, and virtue. But the greatest is love. Of all of these things is love. I think that's right. Maybe a misquote, but that's what definitely reminded me of this. The greatest is love, and that's
mm-hmm,
what Agathon is saying here. The greatest of all the virtues is love. He even gives this great example of Ares, this great god of war, submitting to love eventually, which is just beautiful. The final thing to note here is that he believes, Agathon presents, that love is responsible for the virtues, the things that we find important. Love is what causes us to be in a state of eudaimonia. It's also responsible for things like beauty and virtue itself, and also goodness. And so, is that true? Well, Socrates will kind of tear it apart, but very beautiful speech. It's a very beautiful speech. The last thing I'll just say is that it's funny to note that love is the cause of the good. And so that would be read as something like, love is the cause of me. And maybe, I don't think he explicitly says that, but it would be kind of, as I was mentioning earlier with the names, he does say love is the cause of agathos, of
mm-hmm.
Agathon. And so that's something funny to mention.
It's probably on purpose that Plato introduces love and virtue at this point because we're getting ready to jump into Socrates, who, of course, virtue is highly important to not only him but Plato as well.
Yes, that's a good point. So I want to focus on two things with the quotes that I have. The first big one is this great quote from 197E. And I'll pull that up on my end in a second so we can talk about the context. But let me just read this quote. Love fills men with togetherness and drains all strife from their hearts. Let me pull this up in mine. And this was before I got this new handy translation, but so it might be, oh, maybe this is not right. Well, it looks different in this translation. Let me just read it from this translation then.
Yeah.
Here it is. It would be 197D, I think, in this one, which
Mm.
would be the same. So 197D, he empties us, he being love, empties us of estrangement, but fills us with kinship, causing us to come together in all such gatherings as these. And then he gives some talks, but basically, this is this quote: "Love brings us together and fills us with virtues, or it not maybe not necessarily fills us, but as he says here, introduces us to these virtues."
Yeah, this entire last paragraph. Well, I guess it's not technically the last paragraph. There are two or three sentences that follow it. I guess it's a paragraph. But anyway, 197 D and E. This is kind of the part I'm talking about. That's so beautiful and soaring. He just says such beautiful things about what love can do for us. He introduces gentleness, banishes rudeness, giving of goodwill, ungiving of inwill, gracious, good, gazed upon by the wise. It just goes on and on and on. The beauty and the good order of all gods and men and leaders, and every man must follow, chanting beautifully, sharing the song that he sings, touching with magic the power of thought of all gods and men. I don't know. I have a thing to say about it. I just think this is just my favorite part of his speech, where he just kind of gives in to. I mean, I know he's making a point here, right? He's talking very specifically about what love gives and doesn't give.
Yeah,
Um, but this is where he just kind of goes off and gives himself over to the poetry of it all.
he does. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful speech, and it's important for us to recognize. And I guess this will be my last point here, although I'll bring in a one last quote after too, is that there's some, you know, Agathon brings up this point at the beginning of his speech that we're not really answering the question of the nature of love. He falls into the same pitfall here. He begins his speech talking about, the very nature of love, the God of love, the Eros, the God. But then he starts talking about all that it does for us and how it changes us and the gods
Mm-hmm.
and blah, 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 blah. Socrates isn't going to do much better, but I mean, he will do a lot better. But it's something that we need to be critical of and thinking about throughout this dialogue, because
Mm-hmm.
as we've said, love is so difficult to talk about, and so no one's really defining terms, which is reasonable to a dinner dialogue. You're not going to have thought about this off the top of your head. That's all I'll say about that.
I guess maybe here's a question. Is this something love does for us? Is it something we individually cultivate?
Do you mean it being virtue?
Yeah, well, in all these things that he mentions here near the end, he's talking about what love does to us. It banishes rudeness, and it's giving of goodwill, and it's gracious, and it causes us to be these things. Is this? It almost seems like it is something that comes upon us, rather than something that comes from within, if that makes sense. So I was just kind of thinking, is this really a good accounting of love? Is love that something really does come upon us, or is it something that's already within us and we cultivate that?
I think that love does can bring us to a lot of these virtues. That would seem the way it would be to me. Uh, and I'll give a short little anecdote about it, which you can totally feel free to disregard. And maybe you see this too, but I remember last year with a lot of my students and with just friends in general, when I would see, particularly boys, when they would get, enter into a romantic, relationship or whatever, they would start dressing better, be nicer,
Uh huh.
take care of themselves more, maybe start working out, all of these things. And is that because they, coincidentally found love and this desire at the same time? No, probably not. It was it was a chain reaction. One caused the other, and so I can see love bringing us to it in that way. A counter argument might be that, do you really think that the boy or whoever, I guess it could be whoever, is in love, or is that, lust kind of driving the way for all of those things? And I think that's a fair question. But then again, this might be a question for you. Do you want to be yourself? Do you want to be better for yourself because, of your love for your wife?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
you know, you, all these years later, of course, I still want to be, attractive, both spiritually and physically. I want to be impressive. I don't want to be I don't want to be a slob. I don't want to be a slothful. I want to mow the lawn. So
Do you?
I want to cut a straight edge on the sidewalk, with my weed eater. So she'll say, "Wow, look at how he wields the weapons." You
Yeah.
know. No, of course. And I don't know if that's. I mean, I don't work out. I should probably do that. But yeah, I think we do these things, and in that way, when you think of it that way, it does kind of seem like love comes upon you. I can certainly see that, especially for teenagers, but anyone who are in their the first couple of weeks, the throes of a new relationship, it feels like love comes upon you, and you do want to be impressive, right? You want to look cool, or you want to look funny, or whatever it is, smart. Probably all those things together. And do you do things to on purpose to try to be those things? Yeah, yeah. It kind of goes back to the first speech. Was that not Pausanias? Who was it
Phaedrus.
first? Phaedrus. Yeah, Phaedrus. Yeah, he's all talking about, like, the best military. Will be soldiers who love each other because they don't want to look like cowards in front of each other. And it's kind of the same thing with what I'm talking about anyway. Is yeah, you don't want to look like a dummy. You don't want to look like a coward. You don't want to look incompetent in front of the person you love.
Yeah, that's great. I can't add anything else more. And
Yeah, I did pull the Bible verse you were talking
it's
about.
correct. I know I did too. I'm gonna look so bad.
Ah, no, it's okay. You're forgiven. Yeah, this part of Corinthians is very similar. It's the famous love section of First
Yes.
Corinthians, which everyone reads at weddings and stuff like that. And it's similar to Agathon's sort of gushing of what love is. So love is patient, love is kind, it doesn't envy, it doesn't boast. He's kind of talking about love, and I'm sure we're talking about, in the biblical sense, we're probably talking about the love
Yes.
of God, the love of Christ. But yeah, that final, he just rambles on and on and on, just gushing about love, and then that famous last line, and now of these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. And it just, the cadence of it, the kind of, I've said gushing like 5 times, but the kind of gushing of it reminds me a lot here of this last portion of Agathon's speech.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And the Catholic translation of, or the old Catholic translation of that from the Latin, I think it's thus these are the things that endure. I need to stop
Mm.
because this is not my
Hmm.
area. So let me pull this up. Yeah. Okay. And let me get the old Catholic tradition, the Catholic one, so I don't look like a
Yeah,
fool.
I was reading the New International Version.
Yeah, that's probably the best one. Okay, this is the one that I saw, and it's not as good. But the one you read is way better. But now these are the things. Now there remain faith, hope, and charity. These three, but the greatest of these is charity. Love sounds better there. I mean, I'm sure you can translate it, but yeah, absolutely. I think there's some parallel. All right. I don't think we have anything more to add. I guess we'll do Alcibiades some other time because this
Yeah, I
episode.
don't think we have time.
Yeah, I agree. But it's been so much fun talking about this. Dare I say I love talking about this. So that's exciting.
It's a great dialogue, and love's very important
It
philosophically.
is.
It's important to our daily lives, and
It is.
it is nice, once in a while. I'm not saying this is like not as rigorous as other philosophical topics or something. But it's nice to talk about something like love instead of determinism and free will, or
Yes.
we're condemned to be free, and all this sort of business. It feels lighter, but also just as important. So
Who
yeah,
says
it's been.
that? Who, Kierkegaard says we're condemned to be free.
Oh no, that's our boy Sartre,
Ah,
Jean-Paul Sartre.
okay.
Yeah, we are condemned to
Well,
be free.
we're condemned to love.
Ah, perfect. We are condemned to love, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe that's part of human nature.
Yeah, maybe
That
so.
we love. We love something. Um, I suppose with Aristotle's version of the golden mean or something, there's probably a perfect mean, a golden mean of love,
Yeah, I'm sure.
and a person could go one direction or the other, and all of a sudden you're loving the wrong thing. But yeah, it seems to me that human nature is one of the features is that we love.
Yeah.
We care about things.
Yeah, I think that's right. This has been a great episode. I've enjoyed it. Let us know your thoughts on, but you can email us at contact@opendoorphilosophy.com. We love to see those emails. Even if you just say, hey, we love to see them. Or you can tell us what you love about this podcast.
That's right. We're out there in other places too. Let's see, Instagram. Really not too many other places. Instagram, our email, and then yes, we're on YouTube. So if that's, some people consider YouTube social media, which I find interesting.
Really?
But anyway, we're there, and you can contact us there. And of course, if you're online or whatever, you can stumble onto our website.
Yeah, I think that's it. Thanks to Kevin MacLeod for the use of his music in the intro and the outro. Remember, when your life is in need of some philosophy, the door is always open.
That's right. Come on in. Bye, guys.
See ya.